What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to do a will it run video on this 1974 Honda XL70. I picked this up in a package deal quite a while ago, about a year and a half actually. When I went to pick it up, I saw pictures before I went to pick it up and everything looked good. I got there and as soon as I took a look at it, I noticed that Bubba had tore the top end off of the engine. And I asked Bubba, I said, "Why'd you tear that off there?" He said, "Oh, just wanted to see how it worked." I was thinking to myself, well, that made a whole lot of sense. And I asked him, I said, "Do you have the parts?" He said, "Oh yeah, they're in a box over here." So checked the box out, yeah, everything was there. So I went ahead and took the bike. In the big scheme of things, I got a pretty good deal because I got a bunch of Z50s out of the deal as well. So the XL70 is what came after the SL70, for those of you that like messing with those. They stopped making the SL70 in 1973, came out with the XL in 74, so this is what's otherwise known as a K0. Essentially, it is, for all intents and purposes, the same bike as an SL70. It just comes with turn signals and standard with a speedometer, which the SL70s didn't ever come with turn signals that I'm aware of, and the speedometer was an option. So these are often overlooked bikes for some strange reason, but really they're a nice little ride. It's a standard 70cc horizontal engine with a 4-speed manual transmission, which everybody knows those are a little peppier and funner to ride than the standard 3-speed automatics. Also on this one, it's got the candy topaz orange. Again, only year they made it that color, and really one of my favorite vintage Honda colors. So probably going to have to do this video in 2 parts because we've got a lot of work to do to put this top end back on and then figure out the fuel and spark and everything so we can get it running. So let me do a quick, just a quick walk around, show you how this thing looks up close, and then we'll get on with it. As you can see up close, she's pretty crusty. I have not been able to give this an Alabama pressure wash detail simply because the engine, as you can see, is wide open. That's how I got it. It's also interesting, it's got, I guess it's a Bluetooth counter sprocket. Never seen one that bad. Strangely, the miles on the speedometer don't reflect, but as I tell a lot of people, just because it says 500 miles on the speedometer doesn't mean that front speedometer gear didn't get put back together wrong about 40 years ago. And that speedometer may have never worked since then. Original tires, appears to be anyway, which is pretty cool. She's not in the greatest shape up here. All this chrome is going to take a lot of work. The tank on the outside, it looks really nice. Don't see anywhere where it's rusted through, but the inside's a whole different story that we'll probably have to make a separate video on just to address that alone. I did actually go through and I took the head apart and inspected the valves, make sure they weren't bent, and cleaned everything up real good. And the valves looked brand new. So I just re-lapped them and put everything back together with some assembly lube. And I actually did a static setting of the valve lash on the bench. So I should be able to just throw this back together and not have to mess with the valve clearance. And then the cylinder, you can see if you look down in there, I've been in it, had a little bit of surface rust, so I hit it just lightly with a cylinder hone. Again, this is a will it run, even though, you know, I essentially just rebuilt that whole engine right there. Got a few tools ready to go over here. So let me get back over here and we'll get on to the next piece of this. All right, so in order to do this will it run, you hear everybody say you need three things to make an engine run: fuel, air, and spark. I'm going to argue, especially in this case, you probably need 4: compression. And we're not going to get much compression with that piston hanging out in the wind, thanks to Bubba. But the first thing I'm going to do is just to alleviate having to chase down gremlins, I like to pull the flywheel off, take a good look at the points, clean them up, and just check the points gap and maybe reset it if needed. As you can see, there's also no carburetor on this. It came with a carburetor, but that was a different story that we'll talk about later, thanks to ethanol gas. So let me get this flywheel off there real quick, and we'll talk about how that works. don't do that. I can tell you Bubba's did that on this one several times, because the outside of the flywheel looks like a golf ball from them beating on it with a hammer. And I don't know which Bubba it was, but it was some Bubba that did it. There's a tool for that. You can get these, it's a flywheel puller tool. You can literally get them on the Jungle store for $7.85. I just looked it up. If you've got Jungle Prime, it's free shipping. So there's no excuse for beating a flywheel off with a sledgehammer and a crowbar. Okay, so let me get you set up, and I'm going to actually show you how to use this tool real quick. All right, here we go. So this is pretty easy actually with the tool. This is a 17 millimeter nut. There's a washer behind it. I always just use my impact to pop it off. It's worth noting, you're going to have to use an impact. You can't use a drill. If you use a drill, it's just going to spin the engine. It's not going to take the nut off, but it comes off real easy with an impact. I mean, you can literally hold the flywheel and just pop it right off there. Get that washer out from in there. Then you take your tool that I got at the Jungle store, and this is reverse thread. So you're gonna have, when you screw this in, it's like you're taking a nut off. So you're gonna turn it reverse or counterclockwise. Depending on the condition of your flywheel, it wouldn't hurt to put a little oil in there. And you can just turn that in until it seats. And then all you're gonna do is you're gonna take this, tighten it up, and this is regular threads. Turn it clockwise with your impact and just gently, you can see that? There it is. All right, so let me get you moved here on the camera a little bit. I want to give you a close-up look at the inside of this before we put it all back together and kind of let you know what I did. All right, here we are with the flywheel off. I've already been in here and cleaned this up pretty extensively just to kind of cut down on some time of the video, but as you can see right here is your points. This is your condenser. You got your two stator coils. One's for your lighting, one's for your ignition. I've got a special file for cleaning up the points. You need to clean these points while you're in here, no matter what, especially if they've been sitting for very long. You can take just a piece of sandpaper and fold it over and stick it in the gap there and just pull it out multiple times. You don't want to grind the metal down. You're just trying to clean the surface off so they can make contact. Also on the flywheel, I went ahead and cleaned that up too. I ran it through my vapor hone because it was pretty crusty. Made sure that magnets are looking good on the inside, and that this is an advanced timing advance mechanism in here that you're probably only ever going to see on the 4-speed manuals. Just made sure that was all intact and functioning, and both the springs were present. But that's pretty much the gist of it. I am pretty confident that, barring any issues with the coil, we should get spark out of this thing. So let me get you set back up, and we'll pop this flywheel back on real quick and get moving. All right, so we got the points all cleaned up, check the gap on the points, ready to put this flywheel back on. If you look real close, you can see that there's a keyway in the flywheel, and then there's also a key on the tapered end of the crankshaft. All you have to just very carefully line those up. The magnets are going to kind of suck it on there. But you'll know when you have it in the right spot, because it's going to slide right on. And then it's just the reverse of the disassembly. Put your nut on with washer. Again, I'm going to take my impact 17 millimeter socket. There's a torque spec for this and special tools for holding the flywheel and whatnot. But with this just being a will it run video, I'm just going to do what I pretty much always do and use my impact to tighten it back on there. Never had a problem with this method. There we go. So moving on, let's go ahead and start talking about putting this top end back on. All right guys, got you set back up. Hopefully we can see what I'm doing. We're gonna go ahead and get the cylinder put on. A couple things worth noting when you put these together, if you've never messed with them before. There are 3 O-rings that have to go on this cylinder jug in the process of assembling this. There's one that goes on the bottom. There's actually a groove in the block where that O-ring will sit right in there. And then opposite of that on the top side where the head bolts on, there's another one, large one, and then right here
There's a small one that goes right here. These are your oil passages. The smaller one being where your pressurized oil goes to your head. The larger hole is where the oil drains back into the block. Also, if you've never done this before, the back side of the cylinder has a little taper built into it, which essentially means you don't need a ring compressor. Works out pretty good. I've also went in and I cleaned up the rings pretty good. They were fine. I mean, best I could tell. They weren't broke or stuck or anything. Also, make sure you stagger your ring gaps when you put these back together. Pretty standard on any engine build. Before I slide this on there, real quick, also I just reused the base gasket that was on it. There's nothing wrong with it, and since this is a Will It Run, I didn't see any point in wasting new gaskets just in case there's something else majorly wrong with the bottom end of the engine. I like to use, when I put things together, whether it's in this scenario or a rebuild, this assembly lube from Lucas Oil. It's kind of like honey, so it sticks to anything you put it on. You can use oil. You don't have to use this, but I just prefer to use this. And any assembly lube will work. It doesn't have to be this particular brand. But I'm going to go ahead and get the piston kind of lubed up and ready to go real quick, and the inside of the cylinder before we slap this back on. All right, about ready to slam this thing on. Getting back, remember, don't forget your O-ring. There's a groove in the block. It'll sit right in there in most cases. That way when you go to slide everything together, it's right where it needs to be. And this one's not gonna stick, so I'm gonna put a little bit of this on there. Like I said, it's basically like honey. It'll stick. All right. Since we're doing this on an assembled bike, I'm gonna turn the bars here and get this front wheel out of the way and kind of hope for the best space-wise. Also, don't forget to slip your cam chain up inside of this as you're putting it on. All right, usually works best if you kind of get your hands behind the piston as it's coming down to keep it from pushing back into the block. But typically you can squeeze on these rings a little bit and she'll go right together. See that? There we go. Let me get that cam chain up in there. Kind of hard doing this backwards, but I want you to be able to see kind of what I'm doing. So, all right, there we go. So we can go ahead and we can send that down. I'm gonna hang on to the flywheel to keep that piston from moving. There you go. Comes all that assembly lube. Won't hurt nothing. So far, this is going pretty good. Let me get set up here, and we'll get the head slapped on this thing. Hopefully. One more thing, you also need to make sure you put your timing chain guide back in here. There's a bolt that goes in. I'm going to do that off camera just so I don't get in the way of the shot. All right, guys, switch sides on you. We're going to go ahead and get this head put on real quick. There's a few key points you need to start taking into account here when you do this, because we've got to get the mechanical cam timing set correctly. On your flywheel, you'll see there's some marks on there. You've got a T and F. The T is for top dead center. There's also a little nick in the engine case that you line that up on. So you want to line up the T on the flywheel with the notch in the engine case. That puts you at top dead center, and in this case you can see for sure you are at top dead center because the piston's at the top of the cylinder. There's also timing marks on the head. Inside the head you've got a small nick here, and then on your cam sprocket, there's a circle, and that circle has to line up with that notch in the head casting. Just for reference, this sprocket will only go on the cam one way, the way these holes are set up. You cannot put it on there wrong. However, you can get the timing out if you're not obviously paying attention to what you're doing. I've already indexed the cam in the head at top dead center. I'm certain that's where it is. I don't intend on turning it during the process of putting this back together. And just the last thing I'm going to say is, when you do this, it's either lined up or it isn't. There's no, oh, I'm close, you know, it looks close. No, it's lined up, trust me. And if it isn't lined up, it's not going to run right, or if it run at all. So I did have to, I'm going to have to sacrifice a new head gasket for this, because apparently Bubba didn't think he was going to need that and threw it in the trash or something. And then lastly, back to the O-rings I mentioned. You've got a large and a small. Make sure you get those put on there. They only fit in one spot, obviously. So let me go ahead and start putting this back together real quick. All right, well, we got that lined up on the first shot. It doesn't always go that well, but I guess today's my lucky day. I'm gonna come back here later. We're gonna have to torque these bolts down that hold this sprocket to the cam, and then also, once we get the cover on the top of the head, we're gonna have to torque that down as well. But just wanted to show you kind of the process, and hopefully it was straightforward enough for you. One more thing before we get into putting the cover back on and torquing this head down. If you've got a Honda that actually is still the way it was supposed to be, you'll notice that on this head cover that essentially holds the head on, you're going to have 3 acorn nuts and 1 regular nut. And nobody could ever tell me why they did it that way. There's no rhyme or reason. But the 1 regular nut goes on the bottom left stud as you're looking at it while sitting on the bike. Also, you're going to notice that you've got you can't see it real well because this is the original one and it's a little corroded, but there's also a copper washer and then 3 regular washers. Well, the copper washer goes on the opposite side of the regular nut on the bottom with an acorn nut. That's your oil passage where your oil pump feeds oil to the head, so that kind of makes sense. All right, let's get this thing buttoned up so we can move on to the next phase of this Will It Run video. On this one, I'm gonna reuse this gasket. It's torn. Part of it's still on this cover. The rest of it's still stuck on the head. But for the purposes of this, I don't see the point in wasting too many new gaskets if we don't need to, just to see if this thing will run. I did cheat a little bit, and I ran this through my vapor hone to clean it up. You know me, I don't like working on dirty stuff. So just to kind of mitigate the torn gasket, I'm gonna put some stuff on here. One of my buddies, this YouTube guy I follow pretty close. His name's MRC Builds. He uses this once in a while, this RVT stuff. Yeah, I don't know what RVT is either. He calls it that all the time. He knows it. RTV, room temperature vulcanizing silicone. So it's RTV. I'm gonna just put a little dab where the tear is on the gasket, so maybe it won't leak. All right, remember what I said earlier about you've got 4 nuts. One of them is not an acorn nut. That and a regular washer goes on the bottom left here. And then you've got your copper bottom right. All right, it's time to start torquing things down. I just snugged up the bolts on the head, but I've got this nifty device here that pretty much turns any ratchet into a torque wrench. Ironically, it cost about as much as just buying a torque wrench, but I'm kind of a tech guy. I like gadgets, so I'm gonna, don't hold me to these torque specs. I believe the book says anywhere from 6 to 9 foot-pounds. I'm just gonna go straight to 9 foot-pounds and get it over with. Of course, when you're doing this, just like any other thing you're torquing, especially a head, make sure you're going in a crisscross pattern to get a nice even torque. It's gonna be a little challenging with all this stuff here, but we'll get her done. All right, I'm gonna call that good. Don't forget, we haven't torqued down the cam sprocket bolts, so we're gonna knock that out real quick too. I'm running the same 9 foot-pounds. Probably best to hold the flywheel when you're doing this. All right, I think we'll throw this side cover on real quick. I don't think you need me to show you how to do that. And then we'll get some oil in it and see if we can get some spark. I think we're ready to check that out. So we'll be right back. All right, guys, let's get in here and check the spark on this real quick. Hopefully we have spark. I pulled the gas tank off just in case we need to get access to the wiring and the process of doing this. So on this bike, the Kickstarter is actually slipping, so I'm not going to be able to crank it over with the Kickstarter. That's probably worn clutches, pretty common on these. As an alternative, you can use a drill with a 17mm socket on the crankshaft. It's important that you use a drill and not an impact, because these have to spin counterclockwise, and if you use an impact, you're just going to run that nut off and it's not going to spin. So I've got everything set up. It's all connected factory. I already checked the kill switch is in the run position up on the handlebars. We're going to turn the key switch to the on position. Everything's running through the stock wiring, and I've got a brand new NGK spark plug. Let's see if we can put this in here and get some spark. You may or may not be able to see if it's sparking. I'll report back to you and let you know what it's doing. Also, if you've never done this before, I'm sure most of you watching have, you've got to ground this spark plug out on some bare metal somewhere. I'm not going to use the cylinder jug, because on the XL70s, these are actually painted silver. Even though it may look like bare metal, it's not. So I'm just going to ground it out to the head, and I'm going to fire this thing up with my drill, see what we get. Remember, in reverse. I've got a good strong spark on that, guys, surprisingly. I was prepared to go down a pretty deep rabbit hole on this, troubleshooting. But you know what, as a matter of fact, just in case you run into this, I will go down that rabbit hole real quick. There's a few ways you can isolate some things here to troubleshoot the system. To basically, number one, you can rule out the wiring harness completely on the bike, except for what's coming out of the stator. You got your main stator plug coming out of your engine, and if you look close, there's a black wire. That black wire is what's sending the power to your coil. So you can actually disconnect that. And also, disconnect the input to the coil. There's only one wire, you can't mess that up. Take a jumper wire of your choice. I like to use alligator clips, makes it a little easier. And then clip that on the pin there that comes out of that black wire. And you have now effectively removed the factory wiring harness from the equation, and you're running straight from the stator to the coil. Let's see if we still have spark. And we do. All right, so that's one method. If you get this far and you still don't have spark, you probably should start thinking about, do I have a problem with my ignition stator coil, or my coil itself, or the wire, or the spark plug cap? Quick way to check your stator coil is just disconnect from the coil. And to keep this simple, I'm going to leave this connected because I'm going to pull out my test light and connect my test light to the output of that stator, and then I'm going to ground out my test light on the motor. And what I'm looking for is for that light to come on. If you spin it slow enough, you can see the light blinking, which is the points opening and closing. I'm going to spin it pretty fast, so it's probably just going to be a solid light. All right, so we already know it's working, but that's just another test that you can do. So looks like we are ready for the next phase of this project. Will it run? So let me go ahead and get this situation here closed out, and we'll talk some more about what we're going to do next. Okay, I just wanted to recap on something we talked about earlier in the video, talking about the 4 things that we need to run: fuel, air, and spark, and compression. So we obviously have spark, we just tested that. Clearly we have air, intake's wide open. We're not to the fuel stage yet because we've got some carburetor issues we've got to address. I want to show you something here that's kind of cool about the compression piece. If you don't know this, if you have an engine that you suspect has got compression issues, this isn't a replacement for a compression tester, but this will just give you a good idea. Put your finger over the spark plug hole, slap your drill on there, and spin her over a little bit and see what happens. Clearly we've got some pretty hardcore compression going on. Now granted, there's a bunch of assembly lube on that piston and the rings, but this also tells me that those valves are sealing properly, or we wouldn't be hearing that noise. It sounds like it's running. So just a little tip wanted to share with everybody. All right, guys, I think we've went on long enough for this one. I think we're going to call this part 1, and we're going to make a part 2 when we actually get this thing to bark off. Right now, I've still got to sort out. There's no muffler; it didn't come with a muffler, so I've got to get something, at least some kind of pipe sticking out of that head before I start it up. I'm not going to just run it straight out of the head. Also, like I said earlier, got some carburetor issues to sort out. I think I've got that all figured out. It's just a matter of getting that in part 2 and getting the one thing we haven't done yet, and that's the fuel. So I think we'll just call it a day. And Bubba, if you're still watching, I think we've almost figured out how this thing works. So please click all those buttons down below, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.